All right,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and get started if that's okay. Good. Okay, welcome everyone to part 3 of my DIY PR series. Just as a reminder, please mute yourself throughout the presentation, and then I always leave room at the end for any questions, and you can kind of ask them in the chat box on top as we go along, just so you don't forget them, and then I'll just answer all of them at the end. And another reminder is that in your email last night, you should have received a link to a Google Drive box with documents that I will be going over during this presentation in addition to the slides. So for those of us who have been together since the beginning, since for the last 2 weeks or so, you don't necessarily need to know any of this stuff. Well, welcome and thank you for coming back. And to all the new people, here's just a little bit of information about myself. I own a boutique PR firm here in Austin called 15 Media. And over this 4-part series, I'm really teaching you what I do to get my clients into these types of publications. I'm teaching you sort of my 4 steps on how to do that. So as I just mentioned, I sort of have boiled down what I've learned over the last 10 years into what I call the open method. And the goal of it is to provide small business owners with simplified and effective strategies to break through crowded inboxes and get their pitches read by the media. And so in the first 2 presentations, we went over step 1 and step 2. And now we are on step 3, which is email your contacts. So the first step was sort of figuring out what story idea do I send the media. The next step was figuring out, how do I find their contact information, or how do I figure out what media outlets I want to pitch. And then in this presentation, we're going to talk about the emails that you send to the media. And I would say this is honestly the easiest section out of them all. I'm just going to kind of give you the details of what you should be including in your email pitches. So I do want to go over part 1 and part 2 really quickly. And the reason for this is, 1, if you're new here, it's kind of important to kind of get the background information that we covered. And 2, if you've been here for the first 2 parts of this presentation, it's been a while, so especially since part 1. So I think it's always good to go over, because in this section in part 3 is where I'm really going to combine part 1 and 2 and then show you how to write those emails. So it's important to kind of go over this. So in part 1, which was a few weeks ago, we went over observing media trends. And this was all about how do you figure out what stories to pitch to the media. I think a lot of people, when it comes to PR, they just think of news stories. They just think about pitching the media when they have something new going on with their business. And in fact, that's not really a good strategy, because you're not always going to have something new going on with your business. You really want to figure out how to constantly be figuring out what the media is going to cover, so then you can put you and your business into the conversation. And so one of the things that I always like to stress when it comes to figuring out what story ideas to pitch is that you really have to remember that the media's goal is not to provide you with publicity. Since you are, reaching out to them for earned media, you're not paying for the ad space or anything like that. Their goal is really not to just give you publicity. Their goal is to really provide interesting, useful content for their audience. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that sometimes you do have to play the game a little. You have to give the media what they're looking for. And it might not necessarily only be promotional for your business. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're pitching, because I feel like it helps to make sure that your pitches are better. And then the other thing is, this is kind of the checklist of where we look for story ideas. And we're going to talk about this as we're, writing the pitches to the media, because we're going to be talking about these story ideas. So I think it's important to go over them again, because it's been about a month. And so these are kind of the different places that I'm constantly looking for story ideas for my clients. And the first one is new news, which, like I said, I think this is the one that people think about when they think of PR, is letting the media know when your company has a new partnership or collaboration or new location. And so definitely let the media know. They like to cover that stuff, but that's not really the end all be all of where to look for story ideas. The second one is feel good story ideas. So anything kind of successes from your business, maybe you have some clients who have seen really good results, or even kind of your story behind your business, I feel like falls into this category. And then the other one is seasonal, and I mentioned this during part one, but this is really where I find the majority of my stories, just because so many different topics fall into this category. And it can be things like sort of your typical, more traditional holidays, like Valentine's Day, Thanksgiving, stuff like that. And then it can also be kind of what I like to call your marketing holidays. So right now, for example, right before this presentation, I was sending out a pitch for National Taco Day, which is on Sunday. And then earlier this week, I was sending out a pitch for National Coffee Day. So that is that kind of holiday, those marketing holidays that are sort of the fun holidays. And if you just do a quick Google search for, marketing holidays or awareness days, you should actually find a lot of lists that have all of those. And then you can kind of put some on your calendar that makes sense for your business. Awareness weeks, which are usually health related, or awareness days, also fall into this category. And then also just seasons, spring trends, summer trends, fall trends, whatever it might be. The next category is current events, where you can look for story ideas. And current events is just where you insert yourself into the conversation of what's going on, and you show that you're an expert on topics that are happening. And the other category is expert advice. And this can really be anything, it could be how-tos, it could be strategies, it could be life hacks, any kind of thing that you've mastered. You could let the media know that you're available to sort of provide tips for their audience, because again, that provides a really good story for an audience, because everyone's sort of looking for easier ways to get things done. So that's sort of week one. And then now we're going to talk about week two, which was last week, or part two. And this is where you really pinpointed the media contacts, and I showed you how to use resources such as Google News, LinkedIn, different things like that in order to build your media list. And so here are just some high-level recaps of what that looks like. And so the first thing to really keep in mind, and I stressed this a bunch last week, and it's really, I feel like, one of the hallmarks of PR, is that you really want to be specific. You want to make sure that you're trying your best. It's not always perfect, that you're trying your best to really pinpoint media contacts that make sense for your brand. You just want to make sure that you're pitching people who cover something in the same realm as what you offer. And so one of the easiest ways to make sure you're doing that is kind of by looking at what people have written about or what they've covered in the past, which is sort of the next bullet point on this list, is just look at those things and see, like, okay, this is somewhat similar to what I do, or it's in the same realm as my business and what I do, so let me pitch those people. And then the last thing to really keep in mind is, if you're having a hard time figuring out, what do I pitch, or who do I pitch, or I have no idea what media outlets might be interesting to my brand, I would really recommend that you look at your competitors and at your industry publications. So as I mentioned last week, is that look to see who's covered your competitors, because I promise you, if they're getting media coverage, then it's probably somewhere on their website. And so you want to kind of look at that and see who's covered them, and then pit those same people. And then also, as I talked about last week, is that if you really are having a hard time knowing where to start, or not knowing what publication should sort of be on your wish list, Google phrases like your industry name plus magazines, your industry name plus podcasts, plus websites, whatever it might be, because that will at least give you a jump start to see, like, okay, this podcast covers marketing, for example, or oh, this podcast, covers topics about entrepreneurship, whatever it might be. So those are some really good ways to just kind of get started on building your media list. And so one thing I'll talk about, before we jump into part three, is that the way I have part three organized is based off of what we learned last week. And so I have pitch examples that coordinate with the different media that we looked at last week. So it was online, we have print, we have local media, and then we have podcasts and TV. And so I I kept with those categories again because I do think that they're the most popular when it comes to pitching media. Of course, there are other types of media out there, like specifically bloggers or influencers or, you know, radio shows or whatever it might be. But I just tried to pick the ones that I get asked about the most and the ones that I pitch the most. So I sort of have this presentation broken down into those categories, similar to what it was last week. Okay, so like I said before, is that we're on step 3. We're on email your contacts, and in this presentation, I'm going to talk about tips for writing pitches that break through your crowded inbox. And week 1, I sort of mentioned this, and I just want to reiterate, is that a pitch is just the email that you send to the media asking if they're interested in including your brand in a story or covering your brand for a story. And it really is very simple. You don't have to overthink this at all. I think sometimes people get really wrapped up in writing the perfect pitch or making sure that, you know, their pitches is a work of art, and you really don't need to make it a work of art. It's way more important to get the pitch sent out and start getting yourself on these contacts' radar rather than, you know, writing the perfect pitch. And so I just want to keep that. I really want to stress that for business owners, because I feel like this is sort of the easiest section of the whole presentation, but I find that it is a section that people seem to get hung up on the most. And so, you know, you're not going to get any media coverage for your business if you never send out a pitch. So it's really important to just get that email sent out, more so than making sure your pitch is 100% perfect. So I can't stress this enough, but your pitches should really be short and concise. I see this all the time, even through the PR firms that I work for, is people put way too much information in their pitch. And the reason that you really want your pitches to be short and concise is that I feel like we're all, you know, going through our emails while we're doing something else, or, you know, we all don't have time to read a ton of text. And so the shorter and more concise that you can make your pitch, the more likely someone is to actually read it. And so I have sort of 3 things that I really recommend that you include in all your emails so they're not too long. Something else I would really stress, and I see this a lot again with the PR firms that I work for, is that, you know, people try to make their pitches cutesy, or they try to make them more of like creative writing. And you really don't want to do that. All you want to do is get the information across in the clearest way possible, which this is great for someone like me who actually hates writing, because I could just kind of say, like, this is what I'm offering you. Here are the topics. And then that's it. You don't have to get creative. You don't have to use any puns or, you know, funny analogies. All you have to do is say, this is what I'm offering, and here's more information about my brand, and here's what I can talk about. So I would really recommend that you keep this in mind as you're writing your emails to the media. So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about my anatomy of a pitch, which are the 3 things that I really recommend that you think about for every single pitch that you send out. And of course, some pitches, you know, might look a little bit different, but for the most part, you should always have these 3 things in your pitches. So the first sentence of your email, you should state what you are offering. This should sort of be a summary of your entire pitch. And so even if the media contact doesn't read the rest of your email, they have at least like gotten an idea of what your pitch is about, and they can say yes or no, this fits into what I'm working on, or no, I don't have a fit for it. So the first sentence or 2 of your email pitch should just be stating what you're offering to the media. It should just be a summary of the entire pitch. So here are just some examples, and I'll show you a ton of examples as we kind of go through this presentation to let you know. And again, it really depends on the type of pitch you're sending out, the business you have. So these are examples that you'll probably use a lot. So if you're a product-based business, you'll probably be sending out a lot of pitches around gift guides for all different sorts of holidays, you know, not just holidays in December, but maybe even Valentine's Day, or, you know, 4th of July maybe, or Mother's Day or Father's Day. And so for those types of pitches, you should always start with, I have a gift guide suggestions for X, Y, and Z holiday, whatever it is, you insert it there. If you're kind of doing more like a newsy pitch, You can just say something like, my business, insert name of your business, is launching a new product that does whatever, or is launching a new location, insert information about new location, is partnering with whatever it might be. So again, this first sentence of your pitch should just simply be summarizing the entire pitch. Another example of this first sentence that, depending on what kind of business you have, you'll probably be using this example a lot, is that if you're kind of an expert on something, you can say like, I'm an expert on self-care for small business owners, and I can talk about how small business owners can take care of themselves over the holiday season. Or say, for example, I'll give you an example of someone that I might start working with who approached me. She is she's a professor at the University of Houston Law School, and so she really wants to join the conversation about the new Supreme Court justice and that process. So for someone like her, I would say, I'm an expert in law, and I can talk about the new Supreme Court, picking the new Supreme Court justice. So it doesn't only have to be kind of political current events. It can really be kind of anything that's impacting your community, or anything that you can talk about, you would summarize in that first sentence. And then, here's the last one on there. It could be used for TV segments. And later on in this particular presentation, I will give you kind of specific examples for TV. But if you're pitching a segment idea, you would say something like, I have, DIY. I would like for you to consider a segment on DIY crafts for Halloween or for Thanksgiving or whatever it might be. Or, I would like for you to consider a segment on organizational tips, because I feel like organizing is very hot right now because everyone's at home, and then that new Netflix show came out. So whatever it is, you're just going to use that first sentence to kind of summarize the entire pitch. And again, the point of that is that if someone's, just sort of looking at your email while they're doing something else, or they don't read the whole thing, they can at least know right away, like, okay, I understand what this pitch is about. Yes, I have a fit, or no, I don't. So then after you include that first sentence summarizing the pitch, the next part of your pitch should be your brand summary. And so this should just be where you briefly talk about your brand, what makes you unique, why the publication should care. You can even tell your backstory of your brand, why you started the business. And so, in other words, this is almost like your elevator pitch. And you do want to include this in your media pitch, because you want to let the publication know either why your products are amazing and what makes them different, or if you're more of like a thought leader expert, you want to credential yourself in this section of the pitch. And I would say this, something to keep in mind, and you don't necessarily always need to worry about this right off the bat, is that depending on the type of publication you're pitching, you might change up your brand summary. So say, for example, you're pitching like a trade publication or an really industry-focused publication. They might care about different things than a consumer publication. A consumer publication is not necessarily going to care about all the nitty-gritty of your brand. Whereas like an industry trade publication, they're going to care a little bit more about your process, or maybe industry awards, or things that only industry insiders are going to care about. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not something that you have to do all the time. It's just something to keep in mind, that you might have a few different brand summaries written depending on what kind of publication it is. And to determine what your brand summary looks like, you should really ask yourself, who is the audience of this publication? And so what I would recommend doing for the small business owners that I work with is, before you even start pitching, write down a few sentences about your brand and have that ready to go, because you are going to use this brand summary over and over again. And every time you write a pitch, you don't necessarily need to recreate the wheel. You can use kind of the same brand summary. And again, if you want to pitch different types of publications or different audiences, you might consider tweaking your brand summary. But I would really recommend at least having a few sentences written before you even start pitching, because it makes it easier for you, because you can just copy and paste that over and over again. So here are the 3 things that I really recommend including in your brand summary. So that way you kind of hit all the different topics. So the first sentence, you should state what you do or what you offer in the most simplest terms, because I think a lot of times small business owners, since we're so invested in our business and it's something that we live and breathe every single day, that sometimes we can really forget that the everyday public doesn't necessarily know what our business is. And so I really recommend that the first sentence of your brand summary just states what you do. So, I am X, Y, and Z business and I make organic candles. I am X, Y, and Z business and I create IT solutions for small business owners, such as, so just really that first sentence of your brand summary, state what you do in the most simple form. The next sentence or two, and I really recommend this brand summary only be about 3 to 4 sentences max, because remember, we want to keep our pitches as short and concise as possible. So in the second part of your brand summary, give more information about your business. And this can really be what you think is the most important information, what sets you apart. And so again, it depends what kind of business you have, but maybe it's the way you make your products. Maybe the way you make your products is really unique, or the materials that you use are really unique. Or maybe, you're an expert or a thought leader, so your educational background is what really sets you apart. So use the sentences after what you offer to just credential yourself and show why you're the best at what you do and why they should pick you to, be in their story versus all the other brands out there that are pitching them. And then the last sentence of your brand summary, I always like to kind of use this sentence to summarize, what I do or what the company does. And how does it make your life easier? How does your product or your service make your customers or clients' lives easier? So the third sentence of your pitch should kind of be that summary sentence. It should really say, like, this is why you should care about me, because I provide this to my customers and their lives are made better in this way, or whatever it is. I always think of this as kind of like my impact sentence, just kind of summarizing everything about why you should care. So that's the second part of the anatomy of a pitch. And then the third thing that you always want to make sure you have in your pitch is additional information. So the first part of the pitch, like I said, is sort of a generalized sentence summarizing the pitch. The second part is your brand summary. And the third part is a little bit more nitty gritty. So if they've made it to this part of the pitch, then chances are they're really interested in you and your brand. And so this is where you can really show either your products or you can show your expertise. So you can talk about a little bit more specifically about what you could talk about in an interview, or if you're pitching your products, you can include some additional information about them. So here are some suggestions of what these additional information bullet points can be. And like I said, as we go through this presentation, I have a lot of pitch examples for all different kinds of made up businesses. And so this will sort of make more sense as we go along. But these are kind of what I would recommend including in your additional bullet points. And again, it depends on the type of pitch you're sending out, the topic you're sending out, and then also, of course, what kind of company you are. So not all of these are going to make sense for every single person on here. So the bullet points could be product suggestions. So let's say, again, you are sending out a pitch on summer skincare trends and the products that you think are best for summer. Maybe they include SPF. Then this is where you would include the products in your brand that you think are a good fit for this type of story. Or again, maybe you're pitching holiday gift guides. I feel like holiday gift guides are just on my mind because I am doing a ton of pitching around that right now. And so when I do those types of pitches, I include, I'm sending you product ideas for holiday gift guides. And then in this additional information section, I include a few suggestions of products. And if I'm suggesting products, I usually don't include more than 3. Because if you include more than 3, it just gets too long. And so I always just recommend including 3 products from your line that fit with whatever story idea you're pitching. If you only have one product, let's say you have a small line and you only really have one product, or maybe you're launching a brand new product or you're launching a brand new service, those bullet points would then now, instead of giving product suggestions, you would give product details. So again, it's just more information about what you're pitching. So it could include, the price of the product, more information about what the product's made of, different things like that. So if you're kind of an expert and you're pitching yourself for an interview on a specific topic, then you would kind of get into more detail about what you can talk about during the interview. So I keep using this example, so I'm just going to go with it, self-care tips for entrepreneurs. In this additional bullet point section, you would include kind of the specific tips that you could talk about. So maybe you have a specific meditation idea or specific yoga moves. So you would list out, like, here are the topics that I would go more in depth in if you're interested in booking an interview with me. If you're pitching a podcast or a TV story idea, this is where I always really recommend talking about the specific segment idea that you can talk about. So I kind of mentioned a Halloween DIY segment. So in this bullet point section of my pitch, I would kind of list the DIY demonstrations that I could do in more depth. And the reason that I really recommend including this section in bullet point is, again, it just goes back to, we're all busy. People, especially media contacts, you really have to remember they're getting hundreds, if not thousands of emails a day from, PR people or small businesses like yourself. And so the easier you can make it on them, the better. And so I feel like with bullet points, it's easier to skim your email and get an idea really quickly of whether or not it's a fit or whether or not they're interested in doing something. Okay, so next we're going to talk about types of pitches. And I feel like most of the time, 99% of the time, depending on what kind of business you are, your business fits into two categories. You're either going to be sending out a product pitch, listing the products that you would like for them to consider for a story, or you're going to be sending out an expert pitch, which is just where you offer your knowledge to provide insight or resources for a story that they might be working on. And going back to our last week's presentation, is that this is really good for online publications and then print publications. So online, could be blogs, news websites, really anything like this. These are probably the two types of pitches that you're going to be sending out the most. And same with print publications, something like a magazine or newspaper, you're going to probably be sending out an expert or product pitch. And one thing I would like to say is that your business doesn't necessarily always have to fall into either or category. Sometimes you can do both depending on what you do. This is just kind of an easy way to categorize the types of pitches that you're going to send out. Okay, so let's look at an expert pitch. And again, as a reminder, this is just where you're offering your knowledge for them to include in a story or write a story about you. And I have a whole section later on in this presentation about subject lines. So I'm not going to really go through that right now, because after we go through a bunch of pitch examples, then I'll show you kind of some tips for subject lines. But the reality is your subject line is usually just a variation of your first sentence. So as I mentioned in your emails that you're going to be sending the media, the first part of this is where you state what you're offering. And so again, going on that organizational trend, just because I always feel like topics like this are especially really good for the new year, because everyone's trying to get organized and get their life back in order. So your first sentence is where you just kind of summarize the rest of the pitch. So in this example, I mentioned that, the new year is a really great time to kind of start getting organized. And so if you're working on any stories where you need these organizational tips, I would love to introduce myself. And again, these are all from first person because you're going to be sending them out. If you hire a publicist or have a PR team, their pitches will look a little bit different because they're not going to be from first person. And I feel like I always get this question is it okay to send my pitches in first person? Or should I also always get the question of like, should I make up an email address from my business so it looks like someone else is sending out the pitches? And I really don't think you do. I think it's great that they come from, you if you're the owner of the business or if you work for the business. I think a lot of times, sometimes I've even been on or attended panels before, and I've heard media say that they actually prefer to, just communicate directly with the owner of the business because it kind of takes out that middleman of the publicist. They can get all the information right there. And so I totally think it's okay that you send it from your email address and that you write your pitches in first person. So then the next part is we have our elevator pitch or our brand summary. It's kind of this, it's obviously the same thing. And so, as I mentioned, the first sentence of your brand summary is where you state what you do. So in this situation, again, I just made up all these businesses. But in this situation, I just put that we make organizational tools for women. So that's sort of the basic of what we do. And then the next part is, again, where you just insert more information about you or your business or whatever it might be. And then the last part is sort of that, why should I care? Why do you make our customers' lives easier part? And so as you can see, it's really, really quite simple writing these emails. And so here is some examples of the additional information bullet points. So as you can remember in this section where I just talked about this, is that if you're offering yourself to talk on a certain topic or be available to talk about a certain topic, then this is where you can really summarize what you'll be able to talk about. And you really want to make sure that your bullet points are specific, because it shows what you're talking about. You don't just want to include generic talking points. You really want to try to make them as specific as possible for you and your business, because again, it shows that you're really a thought leader. You know what you're talking about. So, and then you can see the way I close out my pitches is really quite simple. I usually just say something like, thanks for your time and consideration, and I link to the website again. Always make sure that you link to the website in your pitches. So if someone is interested, they can go to your website right away and kind of get more information about you. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll link it down here at the bottom. So I'll say something like this, for more information, please visit the website. But then I'll actually, let me go back to the top. I'll actually link it somewhere at the top too. So when I start talking about the business, I'll link to the homepage of the website. And, if you're introducing yourself as the founder, you could always link to your bio page or your About Us page too. I wouldn't necessarily include a ton of links, but I do think linking certain things that make sense is really great, because in the media person, if they want more information on that, they can just go there quickly. So that's the first kind of pitch, the expert pitch, where you're offering information that the media might find useful for stories that they're working on. The next type of pitch is the product pitch. So this, again, if you have a product-based business, this is where you're kind of saying, I would love for you to consider my products for a story. So as you can see, again, this company is 100% made up. But as you can see, the first sentence is where I just state what I'm offering, that I have Father's Day gift ideas for them to consider. Then we have our elevator pitch or our brand summary, which is just, again, additional information about the brand, what sets you apart, just kind of summarizing who you are and what you do. And then here are the additional information bullet points. So these are obviously where you include those specific product examples that you think would make a great Father's Day gift or a holiday gift or, gift for mom or whatever it is. This is where you would kind of list those 3 product examples from your brand. And again, this is how I always list them. And again, as I mentioned before, don't include more than 3. It just gets to be way too long. So this is where how I always list them is I list the product name, which is right here, and I usually will link to that product on your web page. Always make sure you list the price. And then sometimes I do this, I'll include a little brief description of that product. Again, don't make it too long. And then I'll include a low-res image of the product. So for your expert pitch, you don't really need to include an image because you don't necessarily have anything visual to go through to include. But for your product pitch, I really do always recommend linking to some type of low-res, or not linking, but embedding some type of low-res image. Because again, as people are sort of scrolling through this very quickly, an image can really capture their attention almost quicker than words. So I do recommend having that low res image right under each of your bullet points for the product that you are offering them or suggesting to them. One other thing that I kind of want to talk about for this product pitch, because it does keep coming up over and over again, is that a lot of publications, online publications, they are now getting affiliate links and affiliate kickbacks when they recommend a product. And so what that means is that, if their audience buys the product from a link, then that publication gets a small commission. And so I feel like this is one of the ways that PR has really changed, especially in the last few years. Is before, that was really what influencers did, or more blogger types. But now more traditional publications are doing that as well. So, pretty much all the major websites that you see, like Mashable, Glamour.com, Shape.com, Self.com, they are doing that. So if you buy a product from their website, then they get that kind of kickback. And so if your products are sold on major retailers like Amazon or Target or Nordstrom or whatever it is, I would really recommend mentioning that somewhere in your pitch. So you could mention it, at the beginning, that I have Father's Day gift guide ideas from you. All of my candles are sold on Amazon. Because yes, they will get a kickback for it. That's why you see those lists. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You see those lists like on BuzzFeed or whatever publication it might be, where it's like, here are the 10 best things to buy for your kitchen from Amazon, or here are the 6 best things from Walmart.com, or whatever it might be. And the reason that they do that is because they do make money every time someone buys something like that. So if you happen to have products that are sold through these major retailers, make sure to mention that, because then they could consider you for lists like that. If you aren't sold on those major retailers, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Some of the companies I work for, they will create an affiliate program through Share. There's a bunch of companies out there. Like there's one called Share a Sale. There's one called Impact. And so a lot of these big sites have accounts through them, so they can just use that. So if you do have an affiliate program, again, I would just recommend mentioning it somewhere in your pitch, because people really do want to include these affiliate links, again, because they do make money off of them. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you are not part of any affiliate, don't worry about it. There's still room for you. But I do like to mention that, because if you are part of those affiliates, I do really think it increases your chances of getting that coverage. So now I want to move to the Google Drive to kind of tell you some of the things that you have in here that could be really useful for this section of the presentation. And again, remember, these are the kinds of pitches that you're going to be sending to online outlets as well as print publications, and probably the kind of pitches you're going to be writing the most. So in this Google Drive, I have a bunch of expert pitch examples. So you can kind of look at them and see which ones make sense for your brand. So for example, I have one about goal setting for small businesses. It really follows that same format that I was telling you about. The latest fall trends. So say, for example, you could do like a pitch about trends for 2021 based on your industry. Like, for example, I just sent out a pitch for someone I work with who is a restaurant CEO, and we did, restaurant trends for 2021. He secured an interview with the Wall Street, or I secured an interview with the Wall Street Journal for him. So maybe you can kind of talk about trends in your industry, and you can follow this type of pitch example. Or here's another one, tips with for traveling with kids this holiday season. If that kind of fits something that you can talk about, you can honestly just take this pitch and insert your own information into it. Self-care during the holidays, another one that can be super timely right now. And then, how college grads can take their wardrobe up a notch. So as you can see, there's a lot of pitch examples right here, and you can they all follow that same format. We also have one of the product pitches, which here it is. here are product pitch examples. Again, they follow that same format of, additional bullet points with your product suggestions, and whatever it might be, you can follow this same format. So there's lots of examples for you to look at and kind of figure out what's a fit for your business. But I do want to, one thing I want to stress is that these are just examples. Maybe your business doesn't follow this exact format. That's okay. Just send out the email. I can't stress that enough, that it's more important to just get your email sent out than worry about making sure it fits this exact format. And something else I have in here is a pitch template. So this is just kind of where you can sort of insert all of your information. And I have one for an expert pitch template, and then also a product pitch template. So if you've never done PR before, you can kind of just start by filling in this pitch template, and then you have a pitch ready to go. And then as you start to do more pitching, you can start to get a little bit more creative, but you can kind of just take this and insert your own information and start sending it out to the media. So we talked about kind of the two most popular, which is the online publications and then the print publications, which is where you'll be using this these two types of pitches, the expert pitch and the product pitch. And then the next thing I want to talk about is podcasts, because I did mention that in last week's presentation. I showed you how to find podcasts that make sense for you. Especially if you're doing your own PR, I really, really, really recommend pitching podcasts. And the reason is, I can't stress this enough, is that there's just so many out there. So I have clients who I pitch podcasts for, and every time I go to research, new podcasts for entrepreneurs or new podcasts about women's health, there always are new podcasts that I had not discovered before. And so you really have unlimited podcasts to pitch. And also, again, it's a lot easier to find podcast contact information because it is somewhere on their website. And so I really do recommend, maybe starting with podcasts if you're kind of unsure about pitching. Try to pitch podcasts first and see what happens, just because it is a little bit easier to kind of find their information. So before we jump into pitch examples, I want to kind of talk about what are the best story ideas for podcasts. And from my experience, the best things that you can pitch for podcasts are any type of how-tos, life hacks, strategies, and then also industry trends and predictions. So, if you're a marketing business, you can kind of say, like, I can talk about the trends for 2021, or I can talk about the way marketing has changed because of the pandemic. Those are kind of the two categories that I think do the best for podcasts. So I would really recommend sticking within those. And as I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this is something that we really talked about in the part one of this series, of the different examples of what a how-to is, what a life hack is, what is a strategy. So those are kind of the two categories that I think do the best for pitching or for podcasts. And if you go into your Google Drive folder, I actually have a document, because as you probably have gathered, I'm really big on writing everything down. I think that kind of helps you to make sure that you actually send the pitch out. And I actually, prefer to kind of take pen to paper rather than do everything on my computer, because I feel like there's something about writing it down that makes it feel more permanent. So if you're kind of trying to figure out what story ideas you want to pitch to podcasts, here's a worksheet that you can kind of work through. And so, you can ask yourself these questions, and these can each be pitch topics. So you don't necessarily need to include all of these questions in one pitch. This could give you, potentially 4 different pitches to send out to the media. So I definitely recommend that if you're interested in kind of being a guest on podcasts, to work through this and, write your first pitch. Like, what can I teach someone how to start something? Okay, that's going to be my first podcast pitch. Well, I sent that out. I hopefully booked a podcast interview. And the next pitch I'm going to send out is, can I teach someone how to do something, maybe better, or how to save time on something? That's the next pitch I'm going to send out. And then here, again, it's a industry trends and predictions. Again, these can be 4 different topics. So you can have 4 different pitches just from answering these questions. So now let's look at what, oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. I have my podcast pitch example right here. And so as you can see, the podcast pitch example follows those exact same anatomy of a pitch categories that my other pitches followed. The only real difference is if I'm pitching a podcast, I do try to note it somewhere in there that I'm pitching a podcast idea. So I usually put it in the subject line, as you can see here, but then I will mention it in my first sentence, something about, I think I could be a great podcast guest because I can talk about X, Y, and Z. And then the other thing is the topic ideas, those additional bullet points. Sometimes I'll put something in there like, here are the topics that I could talk about for a podcast episode, or here are the topics that I can talk about in an interview. So as you can see, same format, just kind of mentioning in there that I am in fact pitching as a podcast guest. Because I do think that by saying that, by showing that you're pitching, for podcast consideration, it shows that you at least did some research and that you at least kind of you know what you're doing. You did some research, you picked them out because you think you would be a good fit for their podcast. So one thing I did want to mention really quickly is now we're going to talk a little bit about local media, because in last week's presentation, I know I spent some time talking about how to find local media contacts. And as I mentioned last week, and I'll mention it again now, I think the best PR strategy does include a combination of local and national media. Local media is really hungry to cover local businesses, which makes sense. So I do think it's a missed opportunity if you don't at least try to kind of get friendly with your local media. And so now I'm going to kind of talk about what those local media pitches should look like. And a lot of times they're going to look the same as that expert pitch that I showed you, or that product pitch that I showed you. The only difference is you are going to mention in there that you're a local business. You really want to let people know right off the bat that, you're Austin based, or, you're whatever city you live in based. And then you would also include that in the subject line. Local entrepreneur can talk about X, Y, and Z topic, or local product for holiday gift guides. So that's really the only difference when you're pitching the local media, is that you do want to note that you are, in fact, a local business. Now let's talk about local TV and how to pitch local TV, because again, that is one of the categories that I talked about last week. So what story ideas do well for TV? I feel like I kind of touched on this last week, but here are the categories that I'm always pitching for local TV. So again, that seasonal category, anything for the holidays. It could be food related, it could be gift related, it could be DIY craft related. Anything like that could be really good for TV. Again, those seasonal, how-tos of any kind, or DIY projects of any kind, always do well for TV, just because it is obviously visual. And so anytime you can show someone how to do something on TV, usually the channels are pretty interested in that. So current events is another really good way to get a TV interview, where you can offer yourself as a thought leader to come on their program and talk about whatever topics out there. So I'll give you a few examples of what this looks like. So I mentioned before, but I work with a lot of doctors and also a few schools. And so as we went back to school, I did a lot of kind of current event pitching, where I said, I have an expert. Obviously, you're going to be talking about reopening the schools and how people can adjust and how people can virtually learn, or how they can stay safe in person. And so I would pitch my experts and say, I know you're probably going to be working on these stories, so here's someone that can kind of add information to these stories. So that's what I mean by current events. It doesn't always have to be political. It can just be things that are happening, and that you're kind of inserting yourself into conversation and showing how your expertise can really be valuable to the local community. Also, sometimes news does really well for TV. So it kind of goes back to that story idea that I showed you or talked about before, is that new news. When you're doing something new, it is good to let the media know. And again, depending on what kind of business you all have, if you have something visual, that can be really good for TV. And similar to what I showed you for the podcast, I have a TV brainstorm right here. And so you can kind of write down all the seasonal topics that you think you can talk about. You could write down all the how-tos that you think you could demonstrate on TV. Current events, like is there something happening right now that you could talk about that you're an expert on? And then same with news. And of course, depending on what kind of business you have, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's gonna be a fit for all of these, but at least this kind of gives you a place to start. So now I'm gonna show you what a TV pitch should look like. And again, it follows that same anatomy of a pitch format. You just have to, show that you're pitching TV. And so the easiest way to do that is to, make a note that you're offering a segment idea. So as you can see, I put segment idea in the subject line. Then in my when I state what I am offering, I again mention that I have an idea for a segment on what topic, or I'm available to do a segment to talk about whatever the current event is and how it impacts the people of Austin. And then again, you have that brand summary. So that's why I said at the beginning is that if you spend some time before you even start pitching, creating your brand summary, then you can really insert it over and over again into all of these pitches. So no need to reinvent the wheel. Oh, and I did want to mention, like, as you can see, you could say something about, it being a local business. I do mention it down here to note that it is a local business since I'm pitching local TV. And then again, here is my additional information with the bullet points. And this is just where I kind of give them a few ideas of a segment. So the reason too that I like to give people more information or more segment ideas is just because if you only pitch one segment and it just isn't of interest to them, then you've given them at least a few options. So I feel like it increases your chances of the producer or the TV station saying yes. And as you can see here, again, the closing is really short and sweet and to the point. Okay, now let's talk about subject lines, because I honestly really do believe that your subject line is the most important part of your email because it gets it open. So if someone opens your email, then I feel like you've at least sparked some interest and you're that much closer to getting a media placement. So I really recommend putting yourself in the media's shoes when you're coming up with your subject line. And 9 times out of 10, your subject line will probably just be some variation of your first sentence. And so you really want to think to yourself, okay, what is the media going to be covering? Let me mention that in the subject line. And it goes back to what they've covered in the past. And you just want to kind of try to be on their radar when they're going to be working on a story about whatever topic it might be. So this also ties into the second point of just trying to match what you think they're going to be working on. So as they're working on that story, they can scroll through their email and say, oh yes, I am working on a story about shopping, or I am working on a story about Halloween. So it catches their attention right away. So I also really recommend thinking about this for your subject line is choose the most universally interesting and well-known words. So a lot of times that won't be your company's name. And of course, it depends on what kind of company you are and how big you are and how well known you are. But a lot of times you're a lot better off mentioning kind of that seasonal topic or putting kind of information about what you would be talking about, like self-care tips for entrepreneurs or fall fashion trends, rather than including your company's name, because it just might not be the most well-known information out there. That being said, if you're a big, well-known business, then you maybe do want to include your company's name in the subject line. Like if I put, Whole Foods in the subject line, chances are someone's going to be opening that. Or if I put, Dell in the subject line, chances are someone's going to be opening that. But, for most of us out there who maybe aren't known on that level, you probably don't want to put your company's name in a subject line. Another thing I would really recommend is make sure your subject lines are true to your email's content. So I see this happen a lot sometimes with the PR firms I work for, and people kind of do a bait and switch. So they kind of put something sensationalized in their subject line, but then their pitch is just kind of not that same information. So that's why I do recommend kind of going back to your first sentence and seeing if you can tweak that accordingly to make that into a subject line. Again, keep your subject line short, just because as someone's scrolling through their email, you're only going to see kind of that first part of your subject line. So definitely recommend keeping those subject lines short. I did want to mention one thing that I forgot to mention earlier, and it just came to my mind, is that don't send any attachments in your first email. So if you write a press release or you want to include your headshot, never send any attachments in your first email, because if you do, those can get caught by a spam filter. And so anything you want to send in your pitch, you want to embed into the body of the email. So if you have a product pitch, embed those low-res images. Or if you do happen to write a press release, copy and paste it below your signature. Don't send any attachments in your initial email. So this is another question that I get asked a lot, and it's how often should I pitch? And so this really depends, one, on how much time you have. But I do want to recommend, and I do want to stress, that sending out one pitch is not going to be enough. You can't just send out one pitch this week and then kind of forget about it for 6 months and then kind of send out another pitch then. It is a constant process. And so I really recommend that you proactively pitch the media. It could be 30 minutes to an hour each week, and it can look like a lot of different things. So it really depends on what your goals are, what kind of outlets you want to pitch. Do you only want to pitch local? Do you want to pitch local and national? And so what I would recommend is not pitching the same type of media outlets week after week. I would recommend varying it. So that could look like this. You pitch national one week. You pitch local the next week. Maybe this first week you focus on online publications, and then next week you focus on podcasts, or you focus on local TV the next week. I just really recommend doing something each week, because opportunities build on each other. So the more seeds that you plant, the more likely you are to start getting media placements. And another thing is, sometimes media placements do take a while. So it could take a while because the writer or the journalist, they just have so many other things on their plate. They can't get to it right away. It can take a while because, and I have this happen all the time, where I'll send out a pitch, won't hear anything back, and then 3 months later I'll get an email like, oh, now I am working on a story on this topic. Can your expert talk about it, or can I have samples? So you just want to constantly be laying those or planting those seeds, because the opportunities really will come and they will build on each other. Another thing that you can do is pitch one week and follow up the next week. And follow up is actually something that I will be talking about in our next presentation, which is October 15th, because follow up is really important. So you could also vary it that way, where it's, you pitch one week, follow up the next week. If you don't feel like you have enough publications to kind of focus on online one week and then podcast the next week, I would just really recommend trying to do something on a weekly basis or bi-weekly if you can, just because I really don't think you're going to see a lot of results if you only do it every so often or when you have news stories, because things really do build on each other. You never know when someone's going to be working on a story that's a good fit for you and your business. So I would really keep that in mind. Another way that you can break it up is you could do those long lead publications. So you could do national magazines one week, and so then you're going to be thinking about 4 to 6 months ahead, and then you can do online the next week. It's a little bit shorter. So definitely you want to be planting those seeds all the time. So that kind of sums up this section, and I obviously have a lot of time to kind of answer questions. But I did want to talk about what part 4 looks like, which is October 15th. And so in this presentation, we're going to talk about need to follow up, which is the 4th part of my open method. And this is where I really, I'm going to talk about how you follow up without annoying the media, because I do like to set realistic expectations in that, you're not just going to be able to send out a pitch. You are going to need to follow up, because, we're all guilty of it. Things fall to the bottom of our inboxes or whatever it might be. We don't necessarily see everything that people email to us. So it is really important to follow up, but it's also really important to not be too aggressive and annoy the media. We're also going to talk about the types of media opportunities. So at the end of the day, kind of these two bullet points, the next two bullet points go hand in hand, is that if you pitch yourself enough and if you prove yourself to be an easy person to work with, the media will come back to you over and over again. And you might actually get to a place where you don't even really have to send out that many pitches because you've just shown that you're a really easy resource to work with. You get them the stuff they need on time. You provide great answers. And so I'm going to talk about first the types of media opportunities. So what you can expect once you start sending out pitches and getting responses. And then I'm also going to talk about how do you be a really good media resource so then people come back to you over and over again. And the last part of part 4 is just odds and ends. So this is where I'll just talk about everything that I think is important for small business owners to know that doesn't necessarily fall into these other categories. So some of the topics that fall into this are how to write press releases. So I don't necessarily write a lot of press releases. I don't think they're that useful. It really depends on the situation, but I'll talk about kind of what those situations are, how to write them. Another thing that falls into this odds and ends category is contributed articles. I feel like that is a really huge part of what I place for my clients, and it's really easy to get if you're doing your own PR. So I'll kind of talk about, how to find those contributed article opportunities and then how to write the contributed articles so that they are worthwhile for you and publication. And then another thing that kind of falls into this odds and ends category is that I'll talk about how to have proper etiquette in PR. One of the things that I think is, I really do totally think that people can do their own PR. Small business can totally be their own publicist. However, I think one of the reasons that it's really good to have a publicist is it's kind of that blocker between you and the media. And so I'll kind of talk about how you don't take things personally when the media is not interested or when they don't like your story idea, and then just kind of how to have that etiquette again so people know that you're really easy to work with. So that's what I'll be talking about on October 15th. It kind of wraps up the entire series. And then the last slide, which I've included in all my other presentations, is just how to get in touch with me. If you have any specific questions, obviously ask them here in the chat. I will be staying on as long as I need to answer those questions, but then here's kind of the other ways that you get in touch with me. So I will look at the chat now to see if there are any questions. Yeah, I'm not seeing any, but feel free to, either unmute yourself or ask any questions in here, or if you can't think of any now, always feel free to email me later.
So we have one from Mahani. Rebecca says, how to find podcasts by size. I hear we should observe national and local, but for new business, what size podcast should we aim for first pitches?
So I would really recommend, so I have sort of two folds to this question, or two answers to this question, is that one, it is really hard to find podcast sizes. It's not public knowledge how many listeners a podcast gets. So sometimes a podcast will tell you how many listeners they get, but in reality, because people always ask me all the time, well, okay, I did this interview, how many listeners? And unless the podcast host is willing to disclose that, there's no real way of knowing. So that means that I would really recommend just pitching everyone that you think you're a good fit for. That being said, there are some podcasts out there that are sort of, I would say, like the quote unquote celebrity podcasters. If you're a new business or you don't have a comparable social media following, I don't necessarily think it's worthwhile to pitch them. But at the same time, it never hurts. So I wouldn't let getting caught up on the size of the podcast stop you from pitching. But if you are kind of looking for a rule of thumb, I would definitely pay attention to social media size. I feel like that is the most public facing information that you can find. And so you want to be pitching podcasts that are sort of comparable to the same social media size that you have, or maybe a little bit smaller in their social media size, because chances are they're not getting pitched as much.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have any questions? Or please feel free to mute yourself as well. That's easier for you.
Yes.
I don't see any at the moment, but what I'll do is I want to draw your attention. I'm going to plug in our survey link. If you have a moment, please feel free, or please complete this and give us some feedback. We will actually take that into account to determine, how to improve or what type of workshops to provide in the near future. Does anybody have any other questions? Donna, another great session. Love the template, examples, tips, perfect pace of speaking, very inspiring. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
I had a question. I'm curious how in your template that you provided, how much effort you would put into personalizing the message. Would you do research on the background, maybe for the best contacts, and try and include something personal, or is that wasted effort, in your opinion?
So I personally do think it's wasted effort unless you really think that there's a good link. So again, as I mentioned in the last session last week, is that you're doing such good research coming up with the contacts that you really feel confident that every contact that you're pitching might be interested in your story. The one thing that I do that personalizes it is, like, say for example, I'll give you an example of something that I pitched yesterday where I did personalize it. This writer, she has a really specific column that I thought my client would be a good fit for. So I said in my first sentence, like, I think this would be a perfect fit for your column name, because she covers something so specific in that column that I thought it was good to personalize that. If you just I see people do this all the time, and to me this is wasted effort, where people will just say, oh, I loved your latest article, and link to their latest article. Or I feel like people can kind of see through that. So you don't necessarily need to personalize every single pitch, other than you're obviously going to put their first name. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but you're definitely going to put their first name in the pitch, the first sentence, hi so-and-so, or dear so-and-so. Always make sure to personalize it that way. But unless it's something really specific, like a specific column, or you saw that they were working on a story somewhere, you don't necessarily need to customize every single pitch, because I think sometimes that looks a little like phony when you're like, oh, I loved your latest article on so-and-so.
Which happens to be the first Google hit.
Yeah, exactly. So unless you really are like, this column that they write is so perfect for me, let me mention that. You don't necessarily need to customize anything, because again, your goal is to make sure you're pitching people that would potentially be interested in your business. So you're kind of like customizing it in that way, and making sure that you're pitching people that make sense for your brand and that have covered something within the realm of what you do.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Of course.
Does anybody else have any other questions before we go ahead and end? I do want to let you know, we had a QuickBooks online class. However, that class, we only had a max of 10. We're hoping to bring that back again in February. We do have limited time, upcoming Profit Mastery Workshop. It's a 6-part series. We're actually going to be doing this virtually, which is going to be the first time for us. Again, this class usually runs about $395, but right now during the COVID era, we're actually going to be presenting this class at no cost to you. So please feel free to register if you think that's something that's of interest to you. And I've also dropped the link for part 4 if you haven't registered for that just yet. Again, Rebecca, do you have anything else to add before we end?
No, that's it really. I hope that you'll join part 4, because I feel like it kind of summarizes everything that you need to know to do your own PR.
Perfect. Again, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everybody. And I want to say happy National Small Business Month to all those small business women. You go, ladies. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye.